Welcome back to the Formula E Zone podcast. In today's episode, we've got some really juicy topics. We're going to be talking about a potential lap system for next season and scrapping the 45-minute system we've got this year. Is it Jean-Eric Vergne's championship to lose? We're going to be discussing who is in this title race with just 3 races to go. And silly season is in full swing. We talk driver transfers, all that and more on today's episode of the Formula E Zone podcast. Right, so let's talk some Formula E with enough waiting now. Joining me once again, Jack. It's great to talk to you again, mate. I'm really looking forward to this one.
Welcome back. It's been
Thank you.
really, I would say, difficult episodes. Obviously, we've missed you greatly, but it's glad to have your luscious tones back with us for the foreseeable future.
Luscious, that's a new one. Thank you very much, mate. Tobias, we're also talking to you tonight. Have you got anything nice to say?
It's good to have you back and your luscious of tones back on this podcast.
How were the exams? I'm sure everyone wants to know. You
Yes.
did your exams. That's why you wasn't here. So how were they?
Look, let's put it this way. I'm glad they're over. Yes, I think we'll leave it at that. But thanks, boys. This should be fun. We've got some juicy topics to talk about tonight. But first, let's do a little bit of a breakdown of the Berlin E-prix. Round 10 of the championship it is, and we're really getting to the business end of the season now. But as always, we will start with qualifying, and we don't want to bore you with the full details of qualifying, but the things I took away once again from qualifying was Nissan's 1-lap pace. That looked absolutely mega, but also out of nowhere, the HWA cars, both of them making it into Superpole. Van Dorn on the front row once again. Jack, did you enjoy qualifying? Were you surprised? What did you take away from it?
It was good to see the HWA cars progressing, and I think they're starting to get a hold on the series, which might be scary. Going into season 6 when they become Mercedes, I'm not saying I don't want another series dominated by Mercedes, but you never know. That's what the HWA building up to. They're learning, so all of their stuff that they're doing right now will help Mercedes going into season 6. And I think they've been showing signs. Like Van Dorn has been, in Superpole a few times and been in the top 10 of the grid. Like his qualifying's improved, and for Paffett to finally get a lap together and actually, qualify P4 was really interesting. For me, still Group 1, we had Robin Freins. In last, we had Andre Lotterer, who I think made a mistake on his lap in Group 1. But again, down in the bottom 2 last row of the grid, those two, which are 2 championship contenders. They're both now 4th and 5th in the championship. So to have them below, but obviously Lucas Di Grassi making it through to Superpole via Group 1, that was good, but obviously you can still see where Group 1 is sort of being affected, and those championship leaders starting towards back. So that was, for me, that was the main thing for qualifying. Obviously Buemi on pole for Nissan, which was nice to see Buemi back at the top end of the field. So yeah, that was it for qualifying for me.
But can I just bounce in there and say that I wasn't surprised by HWA up that far on the grid? I feel like I've been saying it for ages that those guys really have figured out qualifying ever since I think that was the Santiago race. I think that was where Van Dorn first showed real promising pace in quali. HWA just is lacking their race pace. It's not a matter of efficiency, and I asked Van Dorn that very question last weekend in Berlin. It's not a matter of efficiency or not being able to, save the battery or whatever. It's just a matter of outright race performance. However, on one-lap runs and qualifying, right. HWA have always been fantastic this year, I feel.
Yeah, I agree. You are right. They have, they've sort of, from the first race of the season, they've consistently gotten better. So, it was bound that, a performance like this in Berlin was bound to happen because they kept growing, they kept getting better and better every race. So, yeah, it wasn't a massive surprise because I think we've seen it a few times. I think Van Dorn got pole once. So, it's not a massive surprise. So, yeah, for me, HWA have been moving in the right direction.
Absolutely, and we have to also to talk about Andre Lotterer. He said he made a mistake on his qualifying lap. He did a major mistake before his qualifying lap even started. Disaster for Diaz de Cheetah, who sent out Andre Lotterer a bit too late, which meant that he only finished his 200 kilowatt warm-up lap, and then tried to make his way onto his 250 lap, but because Lucas de Grassi he didn't really brake check him on his warm-up lap or out lap, but he kind of braked, and that meant both Vergne and Lotterer, who were behind de Grassi at that point, had to brake as well and slow down, which ultimately meant de Grassi and Vergne were able to start their laps, but Lotterer wasn't. He crossed the line about a tenth of a second too late. He lashed out after the race against de Grassi, saying, well, he knew what he was doing and he knows how to... He was kind of accusing him of deliberately slowing him down and trying to force him into the position he ended up in. I wouldn't necessarily agree, because that's just an operational and administrative disaster. You can easily change that by just sending your driver out earlier. And we've seen that happening with Diaz de Cheetah earlier before. Remember Marrakesh 2018, when I think that was one of the first times we saw Jean-Eric Vergne in Superpole.
And he missed the red light. They didn't send him out in time.
Missed... Exactly.
He missed the green light. It went red at the end of the pit lane.
That's right. Which meant he didn't even start his lap. And practically the same happened with Lotterer this time out in Berlin. Yeah, disastrous qualifying for him. And after that happened, he practically had no chance for the race. Ultimately retired. I might spoil that as well now. Retired with an overheating battery halfway through the race. So yeah, he looked promising in practice on Friday, but Saturday was just a disaster for him.
How did you think the teams sort of fared? Because obviously Berlin was weird. It was the first ever event which crossed over 2 days. So, I don't know if you had a chance to speak to any of the teams while you were there, Tobias. Like, how did all the drivers, was it a different approach? Did they have time to mull over what they'd learned over practice? Because they still had the 2 practice sessions and trying to improve the car setup. Was it more like a conventional motorsport weekend that weekend, or was it normal Formula E service? It's all pretty wacky.
Kind of a thing in between these two. So teams obviously had a lot more time to really go into depth with all their data analysis after the 2 practice sessions. I felt the teams had one of the best maybe race strategies, because they could just mull over their data and have a closer look at everything. They didn't overanalyze, of course. That's easy to do. You have plenty of time overnight. You can analyze each and every meter the car has driven on Friday. But that's just too much, because in a race situation anything can happen, and all data that you've analyzed and the entire strategy that you've come up with can be thrown out of the window by, I don't know, being spun around or whatever. So teams made use of their time, but they got some sleep. I think the most difficult part of the 2-day format was the drivers and them having not set any lap times before quali. FP2 ended at 6 in the evening.
Yeah.
And qualifying started at 8:45 in the morning the next day. So on one hand, the track conditions were completely different to what they experienced in FP2, as well as them not having set any laps beforehand also played a major role in that. So yeah, the teams were able to go through their data a bit. That's true. But the most difficult part of it was the drivers not having set any lap times before going into qualifying. Apart from that, it felt like a usual Formula weekend. The schedules still were packed with 2 autograph sessions, for example, and drivers having to run from one event to the next. There was the E-race happening as usual. There were, as I said, autograph sessions, sponsorship events, and the volume of all their appointments were larger in Berlin. So it still felt like the hectic FE race day we usually experience trackside.
And there was, sorry, just this might be a bit much, but there was the Green Tech Festival as well, wasn't there? Was there a lot to do with that over the weekend, or was it just in the background sort of thing? So this is me being nosy. Sorry.
For the drivers, no. For the drivers, it was in the background, but the entire E-Village basically was turned into festival ground for the Green Tech Festival exhibition. Sorry.
Okay.
Organized by none other than Nico Rosberg. And they had the Pininfarina car, for example, the fastest road car, electric road car, nonetheless, being exhibited.
Is that
there.
The one developed by Mahindra?
That's right.
Well,
yeah, with Nick Heidfeld. Yeah.
Yeah, and with Mahindra. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. They had air taxis being there, not flying, sadly, but you could sit in them and have a look around.
I was like, wow, what is this? I was expecting, you know what I was having, and this is really bad on a podcast, but when you have when you live in London and you've got the London Black Cab, now I know it's probably Icon, but all I saw when you said air taxis was a flying London Black Cab.
Yeah, it's been more like a helicopter sort of thing. They call it Volocopter, so if anyone wants to look that up, Volocopter is the company. And also, there were e-scooters and just... what else? Public transport solutions, just generally visions for a greener, cleaner and more efficient future. And the entire E-Village has been a merger of the old FE Village as well as this sort of futuristic exhibition / conference happening there. On Friday nights there were awards given out by Nico Rosberg, of course, another panel of a few experts. Popular actors were there from Germany and all across the world. Nena was there. What's her song in English? 99 Red Balloons. She was there. And the Crown Prince of Norway was in attendance. So we had a lot of celebrities trackside. And that really... When you were walking through the E-Village... As a fan, you really felt the presence of the Green Tech exhibition. Not so much for the drivers, though. They were focused on the matters on track.
Well, that's awesome. Thanks for that, man. Again, I'll just be nosy, but that's a really unique insight. So thank you very much. But we'll go back to the racing. So I think we've spoken all season long about the qualifying system, and once again, issues arriving from that. But the race itself, it was all right. It wasn't the most chaotic race of the season, but there was plenty of overtakes. I personally quite like the circuit layout being nice and wide, plenty of overtaking opportunities. But the race at the front, I mean, the first lap itself was pretty clean for a Formula E race, but the race at the front was also decided pretty early on. Lucas di Grassi working his way up from third on the grid, overtaking Sebastian Buemi very easily. Jack, I know you were saying just before we started the podcast that Nissan car just in the race just doesn't seem to have the same sort of pace it does in qualifying.
Yeah, it's qualifying pace. Obviously, that's where the dual motor system comes into effect, and you can see when they just get those massive accelerations, and that's what the drivers were saying when they were basically taking the mick in Parc Fermé out of Sebastian Buemi. Well, it's only because you accelerated out that last corner and you gained 2 tenths on everyone else because of the car's powertrain. Is the only reason why you got pole. But it just... I think Nissan have shown this in all the races. I think they've got a great qualifying car, and they do have a good race car. Like, their race car ain't bad. It's a top 5 car, like top 5 finishing car. But the reason why maybe podium, because Buemi did get on the podium, but the reason why Buemi hasn't won a race, or maybe even Roland, yes, they've made mistakes. You can say, Roland binned it, Buemi binned it, but they were under pressure because their car doesn't seem to be as efficient. So if you're not like di Grassi wasn't really under pressure once he got past, you can manage the race. But if you've got a driver right behind you in Formula E and you're managing energy and they've got more energy than you, it's much easier to make a mistake, or you've just got to let them through. And obviously, a racing driver doesn't want to give up the position. But I feel like their efficiency problems are basically what's the main reason now Nissan haven't won a race this season.
That's true, yeah. Especially, the thing about Berlin is the circuit really suited three teams in particular. On the one hand, Nissan, Berlin had a lot of slow hairpin-ish corners, after which we had longer straights following, so that's really where Nissan were shining. But on the other hand, in Berlin, efficiency is key. So that suited the BMWs and the Audis and the DS Cheetahs as well. So practically 4 teams, all having Berlin as kind of their, or having Berlin as the track most suited to them, if that makes any sense. And we saw that happening. Nissan were incredibly strong in qualifying, but then kind of had to back off. They weren't terrible in the race, but they still had to back off a bit. Meanwhile, we saw Audi and Lucas di Grassi with a textbook drive, and you said he was driving past Buemi and Van Dorn, and after that, it looked like smooth sailing for him. And I wrote a piece about him just today, or a couple of paragraphs about him just today, saying that his Berlin performance really was textbook driving. If you were to write a book about how to win a Formula E race, this race could fill the entire book, because he moved past the cars he battled against with just the right amount of aggression, still fair, but just the right amount of aggression, didn't risk anything out of the ordinary, and then built a gap of around 1.5 seconds, and then managed it, and managed his energy, managed his tires. He didn't waste any energy. That's the fear drivers always have, because if you overtake the leader and are taken over P1, you could have much more pace than the guys behind you. Although driving away doesn't make any sense in Formula E, because if there's a safety car or full course, maybe not a full course yellow, but if there's a safety car, all your advantage is gone, and you've wasted your energy. And that's exactly what Lucas di Grassi didn't do. He didn't waste his energy, and after he moved past, he built a gap, a comfortable gap of around 1.5 seconds. He could have gone up to 8 seconds, in my opinion, looking at the sector times. But what I think I'm trying to say is that he really drove a clever race, a smart race, and a race with a lot of experience, and you really felt that. He's one of the drivers with the most experience in Formula E, and he really was able to show that in Berlin after overtaking Buemi, as I said, and then just driving a clever race and bringing the car home. Not trying anything special, apart from maybe the attack mode activations. He was not too conservative on those, but apart from that, Di Grassi really impressed me, and as I say, textbook drive in Berlin.
Yeah, I fully agree. Like you say, just so controlled, and considering it's been a difficult year for Audi as well, it really did. If this was the only race you had seen all season, you would have thought Audi are walking it. They really did seem that good, and Di Grassi, like I say, he was out in front and behind. I feel a lot of the drama from the race was coming from the 2 HWAs falling through the field, but also the attack mode zone. I just wanted to quickly talk about this, because obviously it's a huge talking point over this entire season. But I think for me, I'm interested to see what you two think, but this is one of my favourite attack mode zones. It's right up there with Marrakesh. My personal favourite ones are the ones where they have to lose a few positions first, or there's at least the potential to, and then they've got to gain them back before they can really get any performance. But I just quickly wanted to ask you guys what you thought about it, because I thought, you know what, I really enjoyed it.
To be fair, like, attack mode in Berlin was probably the best way, and I think it sort of linked into the fact where it was on the outside of a long sweeping corner when you would actually lose time. And in Berlin, you had the opportunity, because the track is so wide, to do places like that, so you'd actually lose time, because we saw in Monaco and Rome where the attack mode, they didn't really lose any time. In Rome they probably lost about 0.8 of a second. In Monaco they didn't lose a thing, in my opinion. They just went out and just shot back in. They didn't lose anything, so there was he was like, you're going into attack mode, but you're not, you're getting all the benefits, but you're not getting the pain of taking attack mode, and attack mode should be about taking pain rather than just all benefit. And I've had a lot of people talk about attack mode, or where could we put attack mode, and even I've been umming and ahhing about where could I have put attack mode in Monaco, and I don't agree with the pit lane. Yes, you would have lost a lot of time by going through the pit lane, but you can't race through the pit lane, so you have to put the pit lane speed limiter on. So you're going to lose about 15 seconds, which is great, but you're never going to get that time back up, I suppose. I suppose everyone would have to take it, but with the power deficit, you wouldn't, you'd be so far down the field that, you wouldn't really overtake anyone because the cars are so close together. If you go through the pit lane on the speed lane limiter, everyone's going to go past you. So I didn't agree with that, but I think some tracks are really difficult for Formula E to properly, and I think Monaco really stood out to really implement attack mode. And you won't have luxuries like Berlin at every race where you can do that. And so I think for me next season, I don't want it to be like a Joker lap in a sense, like in Rallycross where they have to do some mini obstacle course to slow them down, and that forces them to lose more positions because it's much slower than what they would normally do. But I feel like sometimes, for some tracks, I don't know what else Formula E could do in order to stop attack mode being no pain, because it has to have some pain. It's that whole point of, can I take the attack mode without losing a position and getting away with it? Because sometimes you don't. And what I loved about Berlin is that it made turn 7 so interesting, because they were right on the limit, and then people were just swerving across, undertaking. It was brilliant. The action going into turn 7 was fantastic, caused by the attack mode. So I don't know. I think it worked really well, but a lot of fans and a lot of people are like, "Oh, I really want more of this," but it's difficult to say you want more of this because not every track is like that. So I think Formula E might have to come up with a really clever way of trying to implement attack mode so there is pain like that, because that is when attack mode works. But if you go to a track like Monaco, let's say we go to Bern, and it's not really a fantastic attack mode place because of the layout, then you've got to think of an imaginative way to make attack mode interesting like that in Berlin at every race.
I've read that Formula is trying to look more at sort of hybrid circuits in the next few years. That's all rumors for now, and nothing's been confirmed. But I've read over the last weeks and days, not weeks, over the last days, that Formula is looking at sort of mergers between traditional street circuits as well as kind of normal race courses. So a bit like Berlin, it's easy to implement attack zones or maybe even Joker lap sort of things in Berlin, as well in London next year. We might see something happening in London in season 6. There might be a couple of surprises coming up for Berlin as well, but we'll have to stay tuned, wink wink, about the layout next year. But yeah, so Berlin really would be a fantastic opportunity to implement something like a Joker lap. Although I have to agree, turn 6, the attack mode, was an amazing location. When I walked the track on Thursday, I tried to measure how long it was, how far it was off the ideal line. I didn't have anything good to measure it with, apart from just walking the distance. I didn't bring my ruler, sadly, so yeah. So it's been about 20 meters off the ideal line, and teams were expecting around 1.8 seconds in time lost. In the end, on average, it was 1.3 seconds, so a bit better. I've seen a couple of drivers losing less than a second. 0.9 seconds, I think, was the best time by any driver lost on their attack mode activation lap. But also some took 2 seconds. So yeah, it was really spread out. On average, 1.3 seconds, as I said. And I have to agree, the attack mode activation zone really was placed in an ideal location in Berlin. A Joker lap would have been fun as well, but that would have been controversial anyway. It is kind of controversial in Rallycross as well. It's kind of become the norm in Rallycross, but it still raises questions of maybe being a bit artificial, and we all know about that. But for now, I've also been really happy with the attack mode activation zone in Berlin. And we'll have to see about where they put it for Bern and for New York, because those circuits are a bit more difficult with their attack mode activation zones. New York it's practically in a harbor, so you can think about creative ways there, but Bern really will be difficult because the circuit is really narrow, very steep as well. So the circuit itself is going to be interesting. And then also the question of where to put the attack mode activation zone. I can't really think of any good spots to put it in Switzerland. We'll have to see about that. But I agree, Berlin, the location of it was great. Yep.
What I want to just jump in on with your wink thing. I have a feeling I know what you're talking about, but at the same time, I'm not gonna spoil it at the same time because I have no idea, but I'm just assuming. Because I know a lot of people have been talking about Berlin, about changing the track layout every year because it's on an airport surface. And you could change the track layout every year to make it completely interesting. It's like a new track every year that we go to. But I feel like that's a dangerous precedent to set. And I don't know personally as a racer. Well, I say as a racer, but as a racing fan, I wouldn't like to go to Berlin and have a different track each season. I really wouldn't. Simply because I feel like, despite the track location, the track builds up an identity. Okay, it builds up a character. Okay, and if we keep changing Berlin because we've got that advantage of making as many track variants as we want. And I know technically we have changed it because season 1 we ran a different layout entirely, but this layout works much more better than the first layout did. So they changed it for the better, and I really like this layout. Okay, maybe it could be improved, but I feel like maybe over time. But I don't want to see a new layout every year in Berlin, because then I feel like you go to racetracks and it's it's similar. Monaco hasn't changed much in its period. These street tracks, as Formula E grows up, and if we still going to some of these cities and racing on some of these tracks, we would have been racing on those tracks for 15, 20 years with minor changes. But if we're going to change Berlin every year or make modifications to Berlin every couple of years, I just feel like it takes that specialness out of that event, if that makes sense. I don't
agree.
know.
Yep.
It's an argument. I know a lot of people have been, how cool would it be if we... But for me, it's not cool. But that's my opinion. But, I think you should be skeptical about those sort of things. I have no idea if that's what you're on about. Could be completely different. Yeah? But I know that's been in the news lately, and I know a lot of people have been talking about it. So I thought, as you were giving a wink, and I was thinking, I wonder if that wink is because of that. I was like, I thought, it just, as soon as you said it, I was like, I think I know what he's on about, and it just struck a nerve, and I was like, just say it.
Yes, I sadly can't really talk about much.
Yeah, I'm not expecting you to.
From what I've heard. Yeah, but I have to agree, in principle, circuits develop personalities, and you think about the Singapore Grand Prix in F1, that's a street course as well, and it's pretty much been unchanged for the last, how long has it been, 10 years, 11 years, apart from the Singapore Sling. Yeah. And they changed the bridge as well, so whatever the name of the bridge was, after the Singapore Sling. The Anderson Bridge, yeah, that's right. They changed to the other side of the road. Yep.
Or am I just talking about a rubbish bridge that I don't know what I'm on about?
No, I think that's the right bridge, yeah. Yeah, anyway, so Singapore really hasn't lost its character and its personality, and I think that's important too. I agree that circuits should keep their personalities, and I'm sure Berlin won't really change its personality as well. The layout, of course, is different nowadays compared to the days of 2015 and Season 1. But you still, if you look very closely, you can still see some resemblance between these two. two layouts of the course as well. Yeah, we'll have to wait and see how things pan out. I haven't seen anything, but I've heard things about Berlin's layout and future seasons. Yeah, but I've also heard things about layouts for circuits and in other cities as well. It's all rumors at the moment, and we really only have the only thing we can do is wait and see. But I agree, circuits should keep their personalities, and yeah, I'm open to change, but they should keep the characteristics of a circuit.
While we're on the topic of track layouts, I just wrote down that a lot of people, because Berlin was a really bit like Mexico. Berlin, you could say Berlin is a purpose-built racetrack technically, for like Mexico, and Formula E, they're like, oh, it's a great race, it was great for overtaking, oh man, Formula E should make more tracks like that. And I'm like, no, we shouldn't, because now, yes, it was great for overtaking, but Formula E's identity is street tracks. It's about bringing the race to the people, and Formula E can never, in my opinion, in its whole entire life, cannot lose sight of that. It can't lose sight that it's bringing races to the people. So when you're a Formula E and you've got this city, and you have to be, when they're thinking about having a race like London, for example. London's really weird because it's in the XL Centre, but the reason why it's in the XL Exhibition Centre is because they can't find any roads to shut London down effectively. Like, they would like London to have it there, but they can't actually find a place. So you're dealing with all Formula E people, dealing with all the local authorities. It's probably similar at Alexander de Platz in season 2 for Berlin, when we raced there. You're trying to find a racetrack where the local authorities will say, okay, you can close this little bit, this section here, you can have. Okay, and you've got to create a racetrack within that. And some parts are going to be narrow, some parts are going to be difficult to overtake. But that's street racing. We watch Macau, and people love Macau. But there's parts of Macau where you can't overtake. There are parts of Macau where you can overtake. Okay, but there's, street circuits are supposed to be narrow, are supposed to be tight and twisty, and overtakes are supposed to be magnificent. And we've seen so many magnificent overtakes in Formula E on tight, twisted street circuits. We saw it in Monaco, where it's impossible to overtake. So when I get loads of tweets and fans saying on Twitter that, oh, we want these nice, big, tracks so they can have overtakes, I was like, we don't need it. Yeah, we can have 1 or 2 racetracks like this. This is what I was talking to Degrassi about, and he agreed. He's like, we can have 1 or 2 or 3 races which are sort of permanent racetracks, which sort of give us that difference that we can overtake, a bit like Mexico. But we can't lose sight of, Formula E being a street circuit racing and having those tight and twisty street circuits.
Yeah, for the most part, I agree with you. Not fully.
It's fun. Tell me where I'm wrong.
For the most part. Well, I really... I'll just get out of the way. I really enjoyed this race, and I think the last couple of years, you could argue it's been a race dominated by Audi, but at the same time, I look back at both of them and think they were really good races. But what I mean for the most part is that I find I have this conversation in Formula 1 all the time, and it's the same with Formula E. I like it when the calendar's all a little bit different. I fully agree with you, and I know when we both went to Rome, we had a conversation about the Mexico race, that is that a purpose-built circuit? Well, it is, but it's in the city centre. But I just like the fact that they don't have to be on the road, if that makes sense. Like, we've got the airport here in Germany, we had the purpose-built circuit in Mexico, and just as long as there's variety across the calendar, I'm fine with it. I'm not really fussed if it's a street circuit, if you want to call it that. So I think, like I say, mostly I agree with you, if that makes sense. But I don't know. I'm more intrigued to see what they do with future circuits, because obviously I'm guessing, and as Toby just alluded to again, we're going to have more circuits join next season, and perhaps we could see the biggest calendar ever in Formula E. But also you look at races like Paris, where, again, apology, I can't remember his name, but I think it was the mayor for Paris, or the equivalent
a candidate for mayor. They have re-elections next year, and the current mayor is all in favor of Formula E. She's practically the one responsible for bringing FE to France, but a candidate for the office in Paris, that's the one you're talking about.
Yeah, he doesn't want it, does he? And people are supporting him for that. So I think that's where they've got to be careful, Formula E, because they've spoken many times about having these core countries they want to go to, which I get completely. But just as long as there's a mix, I'm cool with it, and I don't mind where we go, to be totally honest with you. But I think we're all on a similar sort of line there, I believe. Unless I'm talking nonsense again.
No, you're not. We are indeed looking at larger calendars for the next few years, so there's always potential for new cities. The plan is to increase the amount of races we're seeing to around 15, possibly 16 in the next 3 or so years.
Okay.
Next year we're bringing in London, as well as possibly Seoul, although I've heard about lots of chaos in South Korea and nobody knowing anything about the race there. I've read a report. Sadly, it's dating back to March, so it's not the most of recent reports. But I've read a report from a South Korean motorsport, or not motorsport, but automobile magazine, and just a journalist. He was asking around about the person in charge and the company in charge of organizing and promoting the race there. And he was asking around at the police stations who should be responsible for locking the streets and just general local authorities. Spoke to the city government of Seoul, and nobody has even heard about Formula E there. That was the case in March. I've read about, and Formula E, shameless self-plug, we've written a story about Seoul in April in which Alejandro Agag said that they've already found and finalized the layout. So it sounds really messy in South Korea. I wouldn't go as far as saying we are definitely going to Seoul in Season 6, but that's the general idea of where we're looking to be in the next few years. So around 15 races in the next few years, leading up to Generation 3 of Formula E.
Yeah.
And
you know what Seoul sounds like? Seoul sounds like, when we release the calendar. And the calendar will be released soon. This time next month. Well, I suppose this podcast will go out in a couple of days' time. But this time next month, the World Motorsport Council will be meeting to ratify the calendar. The calendar for Formula E will be published from that meeting. So everyone will know where we're going, essentially. And if there's a TBA slot, like we have seen quite a few times, like Sanya this year was a TBA slot. There could be a TBA slot which could be sold because it might not be actually finalised. So we might have to wait a bit longer to find out what that TBA slot could be. So if we do see one of those, maybe we can assume that might be sold. But yeah, and I've seen the reports because I remember Tobias mentioning it to me on a couple of days ago. So yeah, I looked at him and I was like, yeah, it sounds like it's going to be a TBA race. There's no, or because the Formula fell into that trap before in like season 1 and season 2. I feel more season 1 where they released a calendar and then those races fell off the calendar. So in order to avoid that mishap, they just put a TBA to be announced. And I suppose there's no, if it never gets announced, then at least no one technically knew where it was. So it was sort of could happen, could not happen. Whereas it's bad to say, "Oh, we're going here," and then, "Oh, we're not." But yeah.
Yeah, and it's not only the race calendar which is interesting for the next few years. Sorry, Dan, I'm taking over your job, but we also have to look at drivers moving, possibly from one team to the next. Slowly but surely, the silly season is starting, and it's really starting. The first pieces of the puzzle are falling into place. We've seen so far 3 drivers being officially confirmed, and the 4th one practically confirmed in media reports, but not officially by the team. So we've heard about Venturi continuing on with Mortara and Massa. We've heard about Porsche going for Neil Jani, and we've heard about Mitch Evans staying at Jaguar.
Just to butt in very quickly, it was quite interesting you say Mortara because I read a report about 2 days ago that Van Dorn said that his seat for Mercedes technically wasn't secure because Mercedes were considering Mortara.
Interesting. I've heard about Mortara and Massa, or Venturi both, re-signing both Mortara and Massa. I know.
I heard the same. Yeah, I thought they were sticking with the same lineup.
Yeah, I know Massa has a 2-year has signed a 2-year contract last year, so he still had 1 year left in his contract, and I've heard that Mortara is staying as well. But there's a lot of other drivers moving around possibly as well. First and foremost, and he's going to be key for the driver market, Daniel Abt.
Yeah, this one was interesting because when we spoke to him in Berlin, he said that his future is not in his hands, which basically means there's nothing he can do apart from race as hard as he can and score as many race positions as possible to try and save his seat at Audi. To me, he's trying to save his seat at Audi. He's not trying to... when you say it's out of his hands, and he said that... what did he say? I'm trying to remember what he said. He said that highlights. Okay, he hasn't had enough highlights compared to Degrassi. Degrassi's won 10 races. Apt's won 2. Should have won 3. Apt's had 1 pole position. Degrassi's had 3. Degrassi's won a title. Apt's not really been anywhere near to winning a title. And I think that's what he's saying is coming to bite him now, is that Audi probably want 2 drivers that can fight for a title. And Abt hasn't shown that. But personally, I think Abt has done enough to warrant a place. Maybe not with Audi, but definitely in Formula E. I think he's been consistent point scorer in 8 of the 10 races so far. So he's a driver who's quite reliable and will score points. And for some teams in Formula E, consistency is where consistency is key. Having a driver that consistently finishes in the points is a good bet to have.
So where should he go? If it's not Audi, where do you see him next year?
There's many places. Dragon, possibly. That would be a step down.
Dragon? Oh.
Dragon. But the thing is, where would he go? So now this is what the open. So you'd assume Nissan, Bohemian and Roland, right? You'd assume Virgin, Sam and Franz. I know it's an Audi powertrain, but I can't see Virgin getting rid of those 2 drivers. They've both done amazingly. So no room at Virgin, no room at Tech Cheetah, no room at Mercedes or Porsche. He could go to Mercedes. I'm not ruling him out of that second seat, but I think it's highly unlikely. No room at Porsche. Then you're looking at Neo, which is a proper step down. You're looking at Dragon, which is also a step down. If Venturi have confirmed, then Mortara and Massa, then there's no place there. And then Jaguar. The only other place you could go is Jaguar, but Alex Lynn's doing a great job. So if you're James Barkley, Alex Lynn's doing a great job. You've worked with him. You know how he works. You might as well take him. And then Abt could be the first victim of a Formula E driver, technically, who's good enough to be in Formula E, who falls out of Formula E. And I'm also worried for another number of drivers like that. I don't think he's the only one. I'm not saying Turvey, for example. Like, I'm mentioning Turvey. Like, Turvey could still be with Neo next season. I'm just mentioning his name because I think he's a very underrated driver. I think a lot of people acknowledge that he's very good, for example. But he's been stuck at Neo now he's been at Neo all his career in Formula E. And
that's right.
I can't see Neo ever really... Well, they could. It's really bad for me to speculate and say I can't see Neo even, being ready to compete for wins or points next season. But I think it's highly unlikely. And, he could be a driver. Imagine if he decided to go to Neo. But if he left Neo, then even for Turvey, he's like another driver. Well, where do I go? Unless you move sideways to a team like Dragon. So, I think the driver market could be really interesting this season. But I think we could start seeing drivers who, warrant a place in Formula E and have shown over the last couple of seasons. But because, there's just no space in the inn, and, other teams pick other drivers from, up and coming. Like, for me, if Audi don't go with Abt, then for me it's Nick de Vries, or, as you say, Nico Müller. But I'm more looking at Nick de Vries because I'm thinking, what is his chance of getting into Formula 1? He's doing quite well in Formula 2. Audi have tested him in the Formula E car, so he's got Formula E sort of test knowledge, a little bit of it. and he's done some of the young driver day tests. So maybe they want to have a go with him.
What do you think about Alex Sims and his season, and if he's still going to be able to hold on to that seat? Because I've not been that impressed. He started the year quite well. You know, you think back to Marrakesh, and he could have got a win if it wasn't for that little incident between the two teammates. But for me, he's really dropped off in this second half, and I think that's one of the biggest seats that potentially is going to be available next season.
Funny you should say that. I spoke to Alex about that very topic a couple of
Nice.
days ago. And he is involved in the pre-season testing of BMW. He is developing their Season 6 car. But he specifically told me he hasn't signed a contract yet. I don't know about Antonio Felix da Costa and about his contractual situation. I would be surprised if BMW were to throw him out.
Yeah, and he's a BMW factory driver as well, so...
Yeah.
But so
I
is
would
Sims.
be surprised if... Because so is Sims as well. I can't see... Honest to God, I know you might say he hasn't signed the contract, but I wouldn't surprise me one bit if Sims and da Costa are together next season. I think BMW's first season, you know, their first season's been fairly good. I think they could
Absolutely, yeah.
keep in those two drivers going into Season 6. You know, that could be a big plus. You know, stability's been good. I think stability's been good for Audi. You know, stability's been good for Tech Cheetah as well, having Lotterer and Verne. You know, and you know, Lotterer, we could have said early Season 4, or he's going to get kicked out. But, you know, Lotterer's really, you know, come on. I think Sims might, you know, Sims has shown glimpses. You know, you can't forget Marrakesh. I know there was a mistake, but, you know, he could have won that race. And he's had a bit of bad luck ever since. And I don't think, I think the early qualifying rounds when he was towards the top of the championship didn't help him. And maybe he lost a bit of confidence that way. Because at the beginning of the season, you thought it was a two-way fight, really, between da Costa and Sims for the title. So
Looked like it, yeah.
it wouldn't surprise me. I'm looking at Sims' points now. So he got 12 points in Marrakesh. Obviously, could have been 25. 6 in Santiago, but then hasn't scored until Berlin.
Wow.
But he
I
had
was
3
not aware of
races
that.
where he didn't finish, where he was not classified. But he didn't score in Mexico. He didn't score in Rome, where he finished. He didn't score in Monaco because he sort of crashed into the grasses, so that didn't help him. And then 6 points in Berlin. Despite only picking up 24 points, and da Costa's picked up 82, you could say that's a big difference, and you could say, you know, there's a cause for change there. But I think stability will be key, and it wouldn't surprise me if they change. They change. I might be wrong. I might be talking rubbish, but it wouldn't surprise me if they go second full season in and keep the 2 current drivers.
Wouldn't surprise me as well, no. Shall we just quickly run down the teams and shall we look at the layouts? We'll make it quick. So we'll start with Audi. Lucas de Grassi. He seems at this point in time, we should add that, at this point in time, end of May, and there's still a lot, surely there'll be a lot happening in the next few weeks and months, but Lucas de Grassi looks to be reasonably set at Audi. Daniel Abt, he has the performance, but we'll have to wait and see about him and if the team decides to keep him on. Felix da Costa looks decent at BMW. Sims, as I said, involved in the development, but not signed a contract yet. Tachita probably will stay with Verne and Lotterer. Vergne, not sure about those guys. They've been looking good so far. I wouldn't change it. HWA will merge or morph into Mercedes. Van Dorn looks to be set, although, as Jack said, maybe there's another option open for him as well. Same applies to Gary Paffett. I don't really see him driving for Mercedes yet, but we'll have to wait and see
Stranger
about that one as well.
Happened, but I think that seat's open. The second Mercedes seat is definitely open.
Yeah,
I would say so too, yeah. Yep. Neo, I think personally, I think they will stay with Turvey and Dillman. I've spoken to Tom, and he's involved in the development as well. They haven't started testing. BMW have, But Neo are only starting next month, so in a couple of weeks' time. Tom Dillman will be involved and is already looking forward to driving a better car, as he said to me,
Fingers
next
crossed
year.
for him.
So it's not been confirmed on paper, but Dillman looks to be
It
continuing
makes sense for
with
Neo
Neo.
to keep those two, but Neo and Turvey and Dillman are high quality drivers. Dillman proved it when he came in and stepped into a Formula E car first time in season 3. It's just
Yep.
for me, how long will they stay there with
It's
a
a
car that's
strong lineup, isn't it?
underperforming?
Yep, absolutely. Then we have Nissan with Buemi. He'll probably stay if he... yeah, I think he will stay. If he stays in Formula E next year, he will stay at Edams. Roland, he's been doing great this year. A fantastic replacement for Alex Albon. Would surprise me if Nissan Edams was to decide against him. We'll have to see about Venturo. We'll have to see about Jaguar. Not sure about Alex Lynn. Evans possibly will stay at Jaguar, but we'll have to wait and see about Alex Lynn. And that only leaves 2 teams open, and we have to talk about Mahindra and, of course, Dragon. And I'll start with the American team. They have been a mess this year. So much going on behind closed doors, and we only get to see glimpses of what's been happening in the background. But from what we hear, Dragon has been utterly chaotic this year. And there's been reports in Spanish media, from what I hear, that Jose Maria Lopez is looking for an out as well, even before going to Bern. Sounds ridiculous, but we might see that. For now, it's only rumors, of course, and I should add that it's only rumors. But Spanish media are reporting that Lopez is looking for a way out of his contract, even before we're going to Switzerland. Maximilian Günther has been surprisingly quick this year. It's only a question of whether he wants to stay with Dragon's management. They are possibly going to become a customer team next year. So we might see Dragon back with the Venturi powertrain, or reverting back to I think they've used Mahindra before as well.
No, I think they were always Venturi. I can't remember.
I think I might be wrong. Yeah, I think they've always been
definitely
with
Venturi.
Venturi.
They were Venturi season 1.
So who was
season 2? Sorry, season 2 they were using the Venturi powertrain. Season 3, I think there was then this Penske thing.
Yeah. Okay. So I heard that they're going to be going back into the role of a customer team. So the car might be better, but it's a question of whether Max will want to stay with the management at Dragon. And then leaves open Mahindra. Do you see Dan, Pascal, and Jerome staying on for next year?
I think for the team, they'll want to keep them both. I think they've both done a really strong job in a car. I think they've overachieved, both of them, actually. I'm not that impressed with the Mahindra car, and I think they've both done a good job. Don't get me wrong, it's not been completely plain sailing, and for the drivers, they have made mistakes. I think for me, maybe Pascal might look elsewhere. If he can try and find a seat at someone like an Audi, at maybe a BMW, someone like that, I think he might go looking for that. But it's a strong team, Mahindra. You don't expect them to be at the back of the grid next season. You expect them to be thereabouts if they get everything right in the championship. So I think they will stick with the same lineup. As Jack said a minute ago, I think if Apt stays, I think that calms down the silly season. But if Apt goes, I think we'll just see changes galore. So I think that's more the key to it. But no, I think that's one of the better lineups on the grid. And to be honest, it's working for them, so they don't really need to change it.
I think Apt and Sims are the cork in the bottle to this season's silly season. They're the cork. If both of them go, you've got a number of drivers who will be jumping to go to either BMW or Pascal Wehrlein, definitely 100%. He'll be jumping. German driver in either a German manufacturer, he'll be jumping to leave Mahindra.
But can you do that as a Ferrari factory driver?
Well, that's Formula 1. He's German, I'm sure. Can Sebastian Buemi drive for Nissan? Yet he's a Toyota factory driver. stranger things have happened. I'm pretty sure he'd jump it. I don't think if a chance came for him to drive for Audi or for BMW, I'm Pascal Wehrlein will be on the phone. As much as I like Mahindra and I respect Dilbag Gill, and I think he's done a great job in getting Pascal Wehrlein, and I think it's a great coup for Mahindra. I expect a driver of his ability, which he's proven this season, to be jumping at the opportunity. I think one thing I suppose we haven't talked about the race too much in this podcast, so I just want to circle back towards the race. But it's been obviously like amazing discussion points. But what I want to talk about, there was a safety car in the race caused by Alex Lynn. His rear axle just basically locked, causing a safety car. And a lot of drivers have been talking about the 45-minute plus 1 lap system and wanting to go back for a lap system. And to be honest with you, I had no opinion about that until Berlin, because Berlin was supposed to be this race about energy management and energy efficiency, and then we had that safety car, and we were stuck behind that safety car for like 8 to 10 minutes. And energy management went through the window. And it was a more comfortable, but they could race faster. It wasn't. You could say, well, it was pretty close towards the end of the race, but that's because they could go faster, so they could use up the energy. So it wasn't a massive. It didn't become a massive race about efficiency in the end, which we were hoping for. And drivers have been very vocal about moving towards a lap system, and for me, it made sense because when you're watching the clock, every time a safety car comes out now, you're watching the clock and seeing how many minutes we've lost. Yes, technically you'd lose laps. I get that. You would lose laps. But the way Formula E goes in a safety car, we probably lost 2 laps. Okay? But then they've still got to do, so say they had to do 60 laps. It's just imaginary number. Okay? Let's imagine they had to do 60 laps in the Berlin E-prix, which would be an hour. So it's way too much. I've just thought about it right now. Okay? They lose 2 laps, they still have to do 60. Whereas if they were going to do 60 laps, but now they do 52, then you're in it because of the safety car. Then you've lost 8 laps. Whereas you've only done 2 laps in that period, in the time period, if you get what I'm saying. But then you've lost 8 laps of the race technically. Whereas if it was a lap race, you've only lost those 2 laps. So for me, I feel like you have to go back to a lap system.
Do you think they could just pause the timer? Do you think that would work if when, a full course yellow or safety car came out, they just pressed pause? I know it sounds stupid, but do you think that would work?
It's not fair in a sense. It's a good idea, but it's not fair in a sense. It's like fuel in Formula 1. You're still, despite going around the safety car, you're still using energy, not as much, but you're still using energy. So you can't burn fuel and, then you'd have to go even slower. Like that's, I think, too far to the other side. So I think going back to a set laps like Sebastian Buemi and half the drivers have said, and telling us what you want us to drive to in energy, and then we have to build a car. Because at the moment, Formula E drivers are saying the engineers are not building cars to be energy efficient. They're building cars to drive fast because energy efficiency with this battery, with the race length, isn't important. So therefore, they're building faster cars, and that's not what Formula E should be working about. We don't need to build fast electric cars. We're doing that already, but they've got no energy life or battery life. We need to be driving that energy efficiency and building that battery life. And I don't think this current set of regulations in race with the race time is actually doing that.
But to build battery life, you would first have to, of course, open up battery development. And I'm not sure if we're going to see battery development being allowed with the Generation 3 car. Maybe we only get that in Gen 4 or Gen 5. But at some point, teams and manufacturers will be allowed to develop their own batteries, and as soon as that will happen, I agree we would have to move back to lap races. It's also a question of, in my opinion, marketing and PR. Timed races, to me, as one who's been following motorsports for a few years, timed races, with the exception, of course, of endurance racing, always gave me the impression of not really immature racing, but sprint racing. And I know Formula 2 does sprint races as well without using a timed format, but DTM is applying timed races, or has been applying timed races for a few years now. And watching the races on telly, that it always felt like, of course, the clock is ticking, and it felt like a sprint race was on. And Formula E races are sprint races, but with manufacturers trying to create an image of their powertrains having the longevity to last for longer periods of time. That's maybe not the image Formula E wants to build and to create with their races. So from a PR perspective as well, I think a lap system is a bit better than timed races. It's difficult to put into words. I'm not against time races as they are, but it seems maybe a bit artificial and a bit immature and a bit too sprint racy, if that makes sense. Dan, how do you think about that?
No, I was just going to say, I think I agree with you. I'm not really too fussed, to be honest. If they keep it next season, I'm cool with it. If they go back to laps, I'm cool with it. I'm very intrigued to see next season how many of these so-called, if you want to call it a gimmick, that's fine. But if these gimmicks like the attack mode, if they change that up for next season, fan boost, I'm sorry, I've always got to mention fan boost, what they do with that next season, I think there's a lot of them in Formula E, and I'll be intrigued with the timer, whether they change it, because on a couple of occasions this year, Rome in particular, there's been this almost extreme artificial racing where drivers have had to really slow down just to make sure they don't have to do that one extra lap, which of course, yes, it adds a bit of drama, but for some people, again, is it artificial? Does it ruin the racing? It's always something to consider, and I think it's definitely been a big learning curve for Formula E this year, which again, it's been a brilliant season of Formula E, so don't get me wrong, but it's something I think they're definitely going to be looking at for next year. We've been talking a while, so I've got, we wanted to talk about a few different things, but I think we've had some really good conversations today. So I think this is a really good place to end it this week. I think driver of the day, we'll skip this time. If you want to quickly say one, you can. Well, did you? I was going to say we could potentially. All right, change of thought then.
Sure, baby.
Well, it is my baby. I know. What we'll do then, we'll say a driver of the day and a classic. Whose championship is it now? Whose championship is it to lose? I'm going to go first because I've not been here for 2 weeks and I want the easy road. So, driver of the day, Jean-Eric Vergne. Awesome drive from him, a real championship drive. Exactly what he needs to be doing after a really difficult start to the year. All of a sudden now, you could argue he's in the hot seat. But for me, I think Da Costa's going to get the championship. I've had this funny feeling all season long, and I just have this. I don't know. It's more of a gut feeling than news in my head. But that BMW for me has been one of the more consistent cars. Da Costa has been one of the more consistent drivers, keeping his nose clean. He had a really good race this weekend. Was unlucky to not be on the podium. So that's what I'm going with to spice up the end of the podcast. You two can fight it out for who goes next.
I like
Go on,
that.
Tobias. You're younger than me.
Okay. My driver of the day was Lucas di Grassi. I talked about him at length earlier, so I don't really have to evaluate my point, I think. He really had a textbook drive in Berlin. Really impressed me with his performance, and that is enough for the driver of the day title for me. I would say it's... I'd be happy if any of the top 5 would win it. Any of the 22, in fact. If they were to win it, I'd be happy about that. Because each and every driver really deserves to beat a champion in Formula E. But those top 5 drivers, and it seems to be one of these 5 in the end who will make it, all of them deserve it. They've had amazing races this year. I'd love to see Andrei Lotterer win another race in the next 3 races because he really deserves that as well. In the end, of course, it's going to be the one with the most points. But looking at the performance, like very subjective performance over the last 3 races, I would have to say it's Jean-Eric Vergne's title to lose now. He still has to work hard, don't get me wrong. If he does one mistake in the next 3 rounds, he might very well drop off and have a hard time in winning the championship. But as of this evening, May the 30th, I'd say it's Jean-Eric Vergne's title to lose. And now you, Jack.
I have to agree with you. For me, it's Jean-Eric Vergne's title to lose as well. I think the DS-Trick car is the quickest. I think he's getting the best out of it. I think he's probably the best performer out there. And there might be some Formula E drivers out there who will say, "How can you say that?" But I think for me, Vergne has just been stunning over these last couple of races, and I think he'll still be stunning in the next couple. I think he definitely has to be the favourite. For me, I feel driver of the day now. Driver of the day is going to be difficult. I'm going to give it to Stoffel. I think great qualifying performance, not a bad race performance for Stoffel Vandoorne. So yeah, I'm going to go for Stoffel Vandoorne.
Awesome stuff. Well, that's your lot from episode 9 of the Formula E Zone podcast. We really do hope you did enjoy. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe to the Formula E Zone YouTube channel. Go and follow us over on Twitter. And if you've got any questions or any queries, please feel free to contact us. Formula E Zone is always smashing it with its Formula E news, stories, features. It's been a pleasure working with them for this season, and hopefully we will be doing so for many, many more. Thank you guys for listening, and we'll see you next time in Bern.